usually one anyway.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I've been, I don't know, I've been doing the same thing that everyone on fucking Earth that has a brain and soul is doing the same thing we're doing, because that's what it's about, the dreaming or the stuff getting crazy or the scene lighting on fire or whatever it is. It's the fact that we're accessing both times and we're expanding in there's no word for it, forwards and backwards in time at the same time, and it's just there's no word to actually describe.
It's like we're in some kind of combination of Travelers and Fringe.
Which one is Travelers? That show. Well, it's actually exactly that. They're all straight from the bases.
Yeah, like when I saw that, I'm like, wait a sec. Like I was like, that's what I'm doing, right? I was just like, oh, wait a second, this is what we're doing. We're here and we're trying to reassemble the team once, you know what I mean? Like, oh, okay, it was very clear. You know what I mean?
And that's what the show is for, to help people remember. What did we just say a little bit of? Well, before I go too far, so the way about the shape, the multi-layered, extra-dimensional toroid in motion, which is basically just the angles activated.
Right.
What I was going to say about that, but didn't, is that and it's easy to compare to a computer system or simulation in the sense, I'm not sure exactly where I deviated from there, but at least a computer system simulation, where you have, if you could map out what we're doing here, you have the three-dimensional version where it's like two figures communicating. You're in your time locale and space locale, and I'm in mine. And then there's information to describe the data required to orient our physical selves, and then the amount of information that we're using to communicate in reference to how much information, the information of the words are actually in reference to. So when if you say, bottle, it's like, okay, bottle or something. But if you say sun or solar system or something like that, okay, there's more information wrapped up, but there's the same amount of data in the physical realm. It's just vibrations. And so that has to be mapped out in some way, because if we can conceive it, it has to exist. And so the overmind is both what we're doing physically as well as what we're conceiving, conceptually in mind. And so you could look at it like code, but that's like the computational version, that's how a computer would see it. But if you could see it in actual space, you'll end up with these kind of geometric formats, kind of like a wallpaper or something, where there are angles that are split up in different ways of relating the information to other pieces of information to create basically a universe, and it's a universe of information.
Yeah.
You have the whole thing, eventually it looks like one of those flappy toroid things, and
like the stuff she paints, like the stuff Aurora paints. Yeah.
Right. And so then any given moment or situation is going to have some portion of that layout in some type of self-referential geometry to describe the amount of information is being conceived or represented in relation to the entire universe or the whole of creation at once. And remember, it's also self-referential to how much you're talking about what you're feeling at any given moment, because we are self-referential images of the whole of creation into each person, each awakened person, each being. And but that's like the basis of how, if we're computers, we literally see like Terminator lines of code and things like that, and it would just be set up at like columns, or how that would be the complexity of like columns. And then if you take that layer by layer back and forth, you'd have like sometimes when they have like these cube setups of codes in like movies, or it'll be like a fractal, like holographic code. And the point is with the what it's actually, without going with the computer, what it's just in higher space, basically. It's spaces within spaces, and the information aligns in certain ways, and you get like, it look like star maps or something.
It's like a spiritual biological technology.
If you're looking at it doesn't have to be technology, but nature can be technology in itself.
Right. That's what I'm talking. Yeah.
But ultimately, it's a diagram or an extra dimensional. What is the word? The word of information being converted into visual space. I can't think of the word right now, but it's basically like that. And so seeing that, though, because that's happening in a person's mind who's actually visualizing the information and how it creates a type of geometric layout in
Right.
space.
That's what I see in my like I've looked at lots and lots of like sacred geometry and fractal and mandala and all this kind of like hyperdimensional art, and I haven't seen anything that so exactly maps out what I'm seeing as hers. And she told me she takes like a lot of these other artists who do similar kind of stuff. They just like sort of do the sacred geometry and make it very colorful. She actually maps out and calibrates everything using like octave and vortex kind of math kind of structure to do it. So it's actually very precise. Like there's a point about everything she's doing, and she starts with this very basic kind of thing, and things become increasingly more complex and whatnot. It's quite fascinating. But I mean, every little point that I can see in my visual space that I've never been able to describe, like she doesn't miss any of it. And all of the other artwork I've ever seen like that, it's missing some part. It's missing some of the information. It's like, you know how digital loses some of the information as compared to analog? It's like hers is the analog and the other stuff is like the digital. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I'm describing. The computer can get a digital or even holographic layout, and it's always going to convert what is an actual, in this case, not a space because it's hyper or cyberspace, so that converts to experiential, meaning it's feeling, it's experienced.
Yes.
Whereas it's going to convert that into a grid-like Cartesian layout or a holographic like cuboid, some structure that compresses it, it squares it to make it
right.
computational. Whereas, and it fits into a specific set of numbers. With the numbers have to have a base system, and with the computing, it doesn't match with the the number set for nature, or at least the actual nature, which is extra dimensional.
So isn't it? So I think like the computing part is like a closed system, where this is like an open, expansive system.
Yeah, it's analog in terms of like a clock being the gears, whereas
Yeah.
digital, it has to be on the chip. The gears are the system. The information is the system itself. Digital, the chip is a representation and is coded within that, but you can't look at the chip and count up how many numbers are in there to make sense of it. The information is obscured, abstracted, referenced in another. It's literally in another plane. Whereas what is actually happening, if it were an analogous, or at least analogous to being analog, it's a weird way to say it. You can't see it now because we have an organic bioprocessing system of the brain that's making it hyperspatially digitized, which is like the holographic mind. But if we could, had brain surgery or something to see just what it is without our physical eyes and senses, there would be big energetic waveforms and geometric patterns through the air that would be describing literally two beings sitting here communicating in a space relative to other spaces, and it was all mapped out according to that. And the idea is that the actual waveform, if you look at it, you count it up, whatever, you get the actual end result of what's going on. It's not obscured or hidden behind some other abstracted plane. We're literally that plane put into a system that constructs an imaginary plane, and we're consciously looking at the imaginary plane, but our feeling is never left the actual experiential plane of feeling where it's all pure energy.
Yeah.
So we're like the ghost in the machine, the soul, the spirit in a soul, and the soul in a body, and the body wrapped up into the brain and the mind, and the conscious mind stuck in an abstract plane that these sensors and systems are actually doling out through big generators and what could be looked at like mind control systems, but it's just like saying a clock is a mind control system as long as you look at it and format your life according to it.
Yeah.
Everything's a metaphor.
Yeah, but it's a true metaphor.
It's a true metaphor, and they've got it so down that every time the clock ticks, whether it's digital or whatever, they can actually make a person's brainwaves snap to that. Now that's an abridging of free will, so if that happens, it's basically a case of cosmic war. And that's why you see people offering people like, we'll give you this and that if you want to come live your life like this and work this way and adhere to these values. It's basically an option, but with the technology, there's a way to basically entrain a person. But it's never done just because.
Right. Have you seen those Rolex? I think we talked about this once before. Those Rolex commercials with Roger Federer, the tennis player, where it said he's walking through like the Tennis Hall of Fame and looking at the pictures, and he's the voice is saying, "Rolex, we don't just record history, we create it." And
I
he's
think that's,
walking. Yeah, have you seen those ones? Yeah, like the whole like I is so this is my question. Like maybe you know the answer to this, maybe you don't. Is Roger Federer is what he does here? Is he like representing time? Is he representing like what like is he that sort of what do you call it? Like the archetype is for like for time. Like that I don't know what I'm trying to get out what I'm
well,
saying
it
here.
works by association and character, like role playing and
Yeah.
symbolism. I can't think of. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a block there too, but you could look at because if they present somebody in a certain situation with the certain subconscious cues, it's going to be imprinted into the subconscious as that. If you look at, for instance, you can convert the ping pong or tennis to pendulum to time and the basically the swinging of polarity and
Yeah.
duality consciousness, and that's all this whole system is, a continuous polarity game, a polarity consciousness, or at least all this system, like the construct. But then what aspect does that leave out that another person could fit into the role of, and then you get a whole like a TV sitcom like crew and cast member like set that then is regurgitated through the media with enough frequency to entrain the subconscious mind into becoming a part of that system without realizing it and being the audience members to that sitcom that they invented out of thin air. Well, they actually hijacked an original one in order to get it, because you can't create. No one has the power to create other than a cosmic being, and to do that, you have to ascend through certain levels to the point where you wouldn't need anything because you can create it. So if you're that, then you're not hijacking anyone's shit. It's almost like if you're the only way to get a Mercedes is to build it yourself. And if you build them yourself, you're going to go out and steal somebody's car
Right.
or something like that. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. 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 So yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but all the anybody that has any touch of the audience or the people, the population, has to fit into one of the roles. And you'll see when there's friction and somebody's like trying to get out of their role, that's where you see the weird stuff going on with the media and the celebrities and things like that, because they're not allowed to be there without having that role
Yeah. No, I mean, I like
as power.
I like for me, like the easiest place for me to observe that is in the tennis. For some reason, it's amplified there. For I don't know why more people don't pay attention to tennis. There's more stuff going on in tennis that represents what's really going on in this kind of you know thing than any of the other sports, or even in some ways the pop music. Like the pop music, like it's got all this weird stuff around it that is distractions, but I think people aren't looking off to the side where they're telling us with these tennis players exactly what happened, what's going on. There's something weird like going on with Novak Djokovic, where I knew he was on like a tear last year, winning everything, and then all of a sudden it was very obvious to me they told him that he had to throw the match at Wimbledon, and once that happened, he's been trying to get out of his role, and you can tell he doesn't even want to play tennis anymore. You know what I mean? Like you can tell, like there's something wrong with him, and like you don't just go from being on the kind of role he was on to like losing a match in a weird way at Wimbledon, and then just it seems like you don't even care anymore unless you're trying to get out of your role. Yeah.
Yeah, because they see too much.
Yeah.
It's usually if their role is given a certain every I don't want to go too far into speaking for the system because that gets weird in itself. Although
Yeah.
I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do because
Yeah.
it's I'm not trying to be or do anything. I'm literally friggin' like a clear gas in a void space observing, and this is what I've observed and seen, and
Yeah.
and there's no laws against doing that, unless you're like purposely trying to like f people's heads up. But in that case, you're either with them or you're with somebody else. You're not a free agent at that point. But usually it's that every time the role progresses or changes, there's an equal amount of unveiling of information about the secret knowledge to that character set, and then they assume either like the goddess or the oppressor or the unveiler, or you can see them get up with the symbolism, and they're in like the ads or something. Like a lot of times you'll see them in advertisements, and if they're in the pop music, everything's in art there. So then they just put it all out on the screen, or they'll be in their personal life. Certain aspects of it will be highlighted to show what process they're going through, and it's literally.
Yeah, it's very obvious. If you have the eyes to see it, it's very obvious.
Well, yeah, and it's an ascension method because the person's the who you know it's the goal is to go through all the roles of the cosmic family in the star system, if you will, which you know how we both feel about what people call space, but
Right.
with the star system being the archetype, you know, picture book of the inner cosmic personality, which in these versions are compressed down to just their like Greek, Roman, pagan god systems to correspond to portions of the brain and portions of the tree of life and the personality system to get the end result to be what they want, some
Yeah.
part of their demigod system of like a kind of superhuman mind controller. But usually it's mapped out to that, to the point where if there's a change that they're not going with, it's not necessarily because of their money or something like that. It's because they saw too much, and
Yeah.
they're pulling back because of that. Which is why it's done that way, because it's every level is a test of fear. It's like, okay, you got through this veil, this degree of rights, and it's like you're fearless to this amount. And at every level, you think like, nothing scares me, nothing challenges me. I know everything. And then they show you a whole new set, and it's like I was in a made up universe before. All they're doing is taking the pendulum and swinging it up in one direction, and it's kind of like a clock at that point, because they stop it and show you like, this is the middle, this is the truth. See, this was the side, this is the other side, it's the illusion, this is the truth. And then they take it and go another degree, and then they go another degree, and they can continue to do that as much as they want, to the point where only when the person wakes up fully and realizes there is no ultimate truth, it's all possibilities in one, they'll continue to be, pulled along by the snake, or chased around the circle, chasing their tail,
Yeah.
spinning around the earth, if you will. And it's if you grab onto it and you're like, no, but this one was the real one, it's stressful, because it's like losing
Yeah.
yourself. It's losing your mind, your
Yeah.
ego, your identity. When that's why I said I'm a clear void or a clear gas in a space, because the ego doesn't exist. The identity that we think doesn't exist. It's going to fade away.
Yeah.
Only what connects.
It's like being too tied to one timeline or one version of yourself and whatever, instead of being that thing in the center that's seeing all possibilities and understanding that they're all you. Like the way I understand how the whole program works with the alters is what they're doing when they're creating alters is just accessing different versions of you that are in the different kind of versions of reality. And so if we understood that and had access to all that, then we're in control of that, but they're hijacking the fact that we don't know that. Yeah.
Well, you could say they're hijacking it, but you could also say that if you don't do anything with it or don't know it, then you should probably hope that somebody does something with it so that it
Right.
doesn't stagnate and fade away, and then you can start all over. They're
Right.
as much as they're messing with people's heads, turning them into momentary mannequins.
Right.
They're actually
Tapping into
using their
something that's
persona so that it doesn't fade away, and they can pick back up when they're ready to go.
so it's like, well, I guess the better way of saying what I said was they're not, we kind of been tricked or whatever. However, we got to think this place of thinking that they're creating alters. That's not really what they're doing. They're tapping into versions of you and sort of like making use of that in a way that because you're not.
Exactly, and
Yeah,
those altars are already
they're already you.
existing,
Yeah.
and all they're doing is putting them in a reality where they're of use.
Yes.
And then
That's what I understand it. Yeah.
apparently, when you do this, because of what people are, you get another alter. It's from its own complete reality. We just think it's a version of ourselves or a thought or a personality construct. There's a universe, a parallel that it belongs to.
Yes.
And so because when they do this and map them out, well, now they can follow the alter through you, through the DNA, like I said before, traversing through the DNA by translating them into information that goes into themselves, into the mind, and using that information in the mind to then come through the person as a portal, and they can go between parallels and literally beam ships through a person's energetic space and they use people as stargates.
The DNA is the ultimate time travel machine. It's the ultimate, absolutely. Like I'm completely in that understanding in every cell of my body now. Like I completely get that. Like that's the, and I completely get that the people that are chosen for the projects and programs are the ones who are the best or are able to best use their, I don't know if the term is best because it isn't a superiority, who have sort of the most ability to to do that in like a complete manner, to not get tripped up, to sort of go inside, like, to travel out by traveling in, kind of thing. Yeah.
It's the most efficient processing. Remember
Yeah.
the friction, the grasping, the like the baggage, if you will. It's literally akin to like trying to hold on to your baggage in the baggage claim or the loading and being on the airplane at the same time. You can't take any of this place with us or you.
Yeah.
That's why there's a whole other universe where we're going anytime that's done. And so when people hold on to that, it doesn't work. And then that's part of, because everything is part of something else that's part of something else, and it goes, the reasons go like, well, this is for this, but it also works for that. And then it works for that, and then eventually it also goes over here to the complete other side of the spectrum where it's like, well, that doesn't work for that. That does the exact opposite of that. It's a circle, so it still works, because then we're just another team on that side doing the same thing with another universe. But the point is, that's where part of the mind control comes in and the fracturing, because if the only way to ensure traveling to any possible parallel without taking baggage in the ways that are basically being forced to is to have a personality completely deviated from the organic bank or core of the continuity spectrum, and
Because that one has attachments, and so the attachments would be the baggage.
right. Well, it would. I mean, if it's done the wrong way, the person dies.
Right.
Because they try to hold on halfway through and they come back like half and half. It's literally like Rick and Morty certain times where it's like they get beamed through something, or some like the cloning jokes they did on there, and it's like comes out like a deformed, like mutated specimen. Basically, it's the same thing. And it's not that like we'd be mutated. It's that the mind breaks in half. So they break the mind in half for the person beforehand, and everything runs smoothly until later on. But it's all a calculated risk, because other beings began doing this to begin with, because they permeated from another octave in the time before our time, meaning they always had access to this stuff, and they cheated like molesters, like literally Chester the molesters for the human race that bridged into this time through the minds of people, of men basically, who had lust for power, and led them up through power games and rituals, and the early mind control tactics, and infiltrated through that by developing a 4D bridge to enter into the world through organic artificial stargates, which led them into creating the technological system of stargates to access their supercomputer systems in quantum space and the CERN unreality underworld system. And eventually, though, everything, the more ingenious, genuine, and the one of the highest potential of feeling and mind and being wins. So the highest potential. So if people are feeling the desire to gain personally and through gratification and like warlike mentality, and someone brings true unconditional love, the love wins every time. Now this is because if you're in a war zone and people are shooting at you, not so much, because you're not going to shoot love back at somebody. It doesn't work that way. But if we're in 4 to 5D hyperspace and somebody's beaming thoughts at you and you beam back pure essence, nothing permeates that, and it wins every time. So as a collective, if we enter in that frequency scale harmonics into our collective and we beam that out, it bridges this civilization across to a healed one through 5D hyperspace and all their little tactics where they have wormholes, mind wipes, all this crazy stuff, cloning, bridging technology, tap lining, and basically pulling energy off the soul, and grafting to the tree of life, and all that weird hybridization stuff. None of it works. The DNA it's literally, it contains capacity to rewrite history and heal itself, which is so far beyond all of it.
Isn't that what we used to do before all this happened? Is that we would send our thoughts and our love, we would beam them out like that. Like I, somewhere deep inside of myself, when I'm locked into my zone, I remember that. And so that's what I'm practicing. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to remember myself how to do it. You know what I mean? Like, and I have moments of success at it, but it's like trying to, like I have to go to a special place in my head to do it. It's like the process for me now is to try and bring as much of that into my all the time existence as I can. But I feel like I remember when that was what we used to do. Like that's what we used to do to entertain ourselves before we ended up in this space where everything is sort of a struggle and whatnot, is we used to just basically see who could craft the most creative way to send interesting thoughts, ideas, and love back and forth to one another. And that was sort of how we we amused ourselves and each other back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's like a specific time window where this conversation happens on Earth, or what you could call Earth 6, and 7 is the underworld octave. If underworld is a term where the thought form entities that never made it into completion are stuck. It's like the buffer zone for the universe. If it doesn't go nowhere, what would that be? It's a shitty computer system. Excuse my language. If it's like you have finished a Word document and you like save it, but it's not fully finished and it instantly deletes itself. No, it just goes into a shitty document file folder. And but that means there's also, if you drop down in frequency enough and drop out of a body, you go into a hell realm where it's just like gnashing and devouring, and it's guided by the lower dimensional awareness. But the idea is what we used to be, and before this generation and before this bounce, which is basically one of the terms and one of the methods that is used to overcome some of the systems. Like there's a time trap or a Super Mario oil slick, well, they can bounce it and bounce to one where there's not one. It's all just like, it's a form of modifying the system, and it's because you're creating the path as you drive your little car along. So modify this, how the system is all set up. But the idea is that we would have literally mentioned that, and then it would have deleted itself from the history after we were done with the conversation, and we would have forgotten all about it if we didn't reach this point in history, because that was the time before this time. And we used the same thing, but it was how Randy said we were dreaming. I made a video on this tonight, and I was rendering it. I'll finish rendering it. I also don't want to release it till like 4 a.m. I'll release it, like 8 or like 6 a.m. The reason this place became the way it has been or has become, because of the density level, is because in a constant dreaming, we held on to one dream and said, this is the only dream. And if this ends, we're dead. It's over. Like, this must be what it is, and it can't be anything else. And so, of course, that's how you create hell, where it's like, that's pure manipulation, whether it's through our fear or something else impressing upon us and leaving us in a time cage. But the idea is, it was like this, where we could have a form, but we could literally wake up in another form. And I don't mean like another being or body, but we could, like, anything was possible. Basically, so the idea is that just the way the 5D version of feeling works, to the point where everything below that is mechanical, warlike, artificial, extra-dimensional, or it's actually interdimensional technology with this time wars. 5D is pure creation and intent, and nothing can overcome that, at least nothing lower. So we were literally in a human form in a 5D creation space, where every next event of what happened was created based upon what we wanted to experience, and it was conscious. Now we're doing it subconsciously in a collective mapped out by computer systems and literally negative energy beings who are calling the shots.
So when I go into that space, like when I'm dancing and I close my eyes and I'm basically creating, is that where am I viewing the 5D, or am I there? Have I developed such a good sort of way of connecting with that for all intents and purposes I'm there, or am I just viewing myself there doing it?
Well, there's no answer except for the true answer, which is that both are occurring, but the more important and the more real one is actually occurring, whereas the other ones, the temporaries, are daydreams. And you could say, if this space exists and it has to be encompassed within a space that encompasses the parameters of the space we're in, as well as the information that's beyond this space, then we're actually in the information that's beyond this space. And so this is a portion of what we're in, but what this is 3 and 4D is actually in 5D. So it means that we're originally in 5D, stepping down into broken time, and then we're going to go back to 5D, just like we're dipping in and out of a well. And so it also means
like the place I go when I'm sleeping is more real than this reality when I'm awake. That space is more real, even though it seems like I'm spending more time here. Like that's the real place.
And it's also perception, because just like how the hallway kind of looks like it expands out and then it goes down. There's a what is it called? with the sun. It's just something the sun rays do where they bend out and then go back in. I can't remember. Someone get the C word, like not Copernicus or something.
Not Copernicus. That's a person.
Yeah.
I like to say Copernicus though.
But it sounds like that. It's anybody who
So
studies.
it's like when it looks like it's going out for a second and then it curves back. It goes in. So like you're looking at the expansive hallway and it looks wide and then it goes in.
Yeah. But the idea is it seems longer than it actually crepuscular rays. So it's like an optical illusion to the point where the space we're in seems more reasonable and
Crepuscular. How do you spell that?
crepuscular, CREPUSC.
Crepuscular rays. Okay.
All
right.
And so it just means when you have the sun on the horizon and it looks like they're expanding out and then they reach a halfway point and then they go off into the distance and they come down to a point again, just like a hallway or something.
Crepuscular. Okay, so crepuscular rays.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Okay, gotcha.
And so we're in that where wherever we're at seems like the wide area of the time space, but it's actually not. It's just the way we're in a bubble. Everywhere we look, there's a horizon of time.
Right.
And so, but the thing is, on the other side, the way everything works, that seems drastically more expanse than the expanse of this side does when we're here. And it's because there's it's an exponential amount of more information and variance than is here, because here it's the same thing regurgitated over and over again, kind of like dolls, where there it's literally you make it up as you go. But the point is that there's no definitive answer except for the fact that it would be as if we're there right now and we're daydreaming in this reality.
Yes.
And this goes back with what you were saying before, kind of why I wanted to begin recording initially, because the people that are, selected or utilized, whatever you want to call it, they're capable of doing this efficiently, which means not holding on, not having. It's like a streamline effect of moving through hyperspace. And in reality, it's because we're actually operating from the other end in.
I knew it.
And when you get it, it flips the time cone. That's what I was describing with the time cone, the conscious, subconscious. Yeah. And this time becomes the dream time, and that becomes the reality. And what that is a short and long-term memory of the conscious, subconscious flipping. And they can do this with technology now. And it's the strangest thing, but they figured it out. They figured out how to. It crushes or it heals the matrix system, if you will, the broken time construct. It doesn't go to work. It doesn't break it again. It doesn't fuck them up. It fixes things. It heals things to the point. But it's because the truth is in us the whole time. The only way to rule over humanity, if we're the 5D creators and they're like interdimensional parasites, is to trick people into supporting them doing it, and they're punching themselves in the face.
Like it felt like that's like when I had that experience a couple weeks ago. That's what it felt like. Like it felt like I had somehow like connected, connected to my future self, watching myself do that. I could communicate back and forth, and it opened up not just a connection to there, but the connection to who I was in the very beginning. So I was like the exact like midpoint. Like information could travel through me to me in the future, watching myself down here, and then to the past. It's like we talked about before, like that being tethered to who you were is in the original creation, and your highest self you're trying to get to. That is the one up there, future, watching yourself, sending the information back down. And it was like I opened up some complete kind of, energy, like movement system between them, and it felt the whole night just felt like that, like healing. Like I was thinking about things from I was having this kind of a really incredible experience where I was thinking of things not just that have gone on in this life, but things that I know that have gone on in other me's and other nows and other parallel or simultaneously occurring timelines, that because as humans we perceive time as linearly, seem like they might be in the past or in the future. And it was like I was sort of kind of like creating some level of harmony between them by whatever I was doing. Does that make any sense?
Well, you're narrowing it down, because I'm basically supposed to listen for a little bit, because when I get confused about how to say it, then it's because the path. So everything has meaning. Everything is part of a never-ending story. It's painting itself out, and it's beckoning us to paint with it. Yeah. And so where I'm like, wondering how to describe it next, you then go and like shape it and say it. And so it's basically that we're tethered from hyperspace into an avatar system within a 3 and 4D daydream using a human biological system, in that in order to gain the information, the awareness of the larger view, which is actually simultaneously after and before this entire universe's timeline, we have to vibrate in a resonant, sympathetic resonance with the version of ourselves that is in the time before time.
Yes.
So what it amounts to is pure creation, where everything we're experiencing from this side is actually first being daydreamed up from the mind of whoever we are in the other side across the boundary, the boundary limit, basically. And it has to do with what you were talking about before, because the way everything worked before, it was like they described heaven or something, where it's not like we don't have anything to do. It's that there's nothing to do other than kind of float around, and not like literally float around, but just kind of like waft around with whatever takes our attention, and literally practice not competing, but kind of like one-upping each other or ourselves in the best and most vibrant expression of bioetheric energy, which is, and so the idea is that in that toroidal device system of creation, it's a shape, system, device, mathematical formula somebody created, and we basically lease it out and have a go with it, like a merry-go-round, same thing, or gravitron. And when you're in there, what you and it's actually, that's all of existence. There is no outside of it.
Yep.
Or at least this time around, whatever you want to call it. And when you're in there, just like down here, the thoughts you put out come back as experiences.
Yes.
Here, it's like a monkey on a typewriter.
So do you think we're experiencing some of those thoughts we put out then?
Well, that's what this whole thing is, and that's the concept of synchromysticism, which I know you're adept enough to know, because I know your energy as well. And some of the first talks we had about was you changing your path in basically history, because noticing variables differently and taking simultaneously different choices.
Yeah.
And that was a synchronization of mind on multiple levels that are beyond the limitations of what your mind should be able to do here if we're just connected to one, linear system. So the idea is that it's all happening now, and everything that is happening is something we basically dreamt up, and are right now dreaming it up. But we feel like it's a light year, away in history.
Okay, so did you ever see? I think I'm gonna break this down. I think I have a good way to break this down. Did you ever see the episode of Cosby Show where he's tap dancing with his friend, and they're like doing a tap dance and going challenge, and then his friend would do like a better tap dance and go challenge, and they're having a good time, but they were sort of competing who could come up with like the most intricate, ridiculous sort of pattern of like tap dancing stuff, right? So for me, like I feel like what we used to do is have some kind of like, it was like you know what capoeira is?
What's that?
Capoiera. I think is how you spell it. Capoeira. It's a Brazilian martial art that's disguised as dancing. So what?
Capoeira, yeah.
Capoeira. Okay.
Okay, capoeira.
Yeah. So like I feel like I used to do, or maybe I still do, but I'm involved in like a slower process of it or something. It would be like a capoeira thing where we were like doing this stuff with our bodies and sending out mental images that were like ideas, thought forms, geometries, like different, like basically creating like a reality, sending it over to the other person, seeing what kind of like crazier thing that they could make. We'd send it back, and it would be like a one-upsmanship, but it would be fun. We weren't like killing each other over it, and that was the whole thing. Do you think maybe we've gotten to the like what happened was we got to the point where we created such complex universes that we're in like a very slow motion send back and forth, and right now we're like I'm experiencing the whatever reality the person across from me that I was playing this game with sent over for me to experience, and I just have to sort of wake up and create a new experience to send back, like something like that.
Well, the act of waking up and doing whatever you're going to do in the reality becomes overlaid with your rebuttal, and now we're both you're beatboxing a response, and before your response is done, the other rebuttal becomes part of what. It's basically like scratching or DJ or anything, or break dancing or capoeira. How the person that does the one up, well, that's going to be based in reference off of what the other person did, but they're lasting so long now that they're not waiting for the thing to end to the point where it's a constant stream and there's no back and forth anymore.
So it's like a DJ set where like there's always at least 2 or 3 or 4 records going at one time. If there's one that's like the main one, but the others are coming in and starting to play with the sounds and the frequencies, and one is going out, and you have that moment for 1 second where you can tell which record is the main one being played, but that's just for a second, and then the other one becomes dominant and another one falls out, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's mainly about like the procession is no longer wobbling, but it's a simultaneous resonance to the point where it's a trinity of creation versus a duality.
Yes.
But that's where in line the boundaries between whose effing world is in whose effing world is merged to the point where now in each other's world. And what I was saying, which kind of like it wraps that concept, is that your rebuttal is the act of realizing what is happening in the first place.
Right.
Because now it's no longer how good you can come back with it. It's the fact that you're surviving, the fact that you're in this world system situation, and it's not like you could die or anything like that. It's just that it's become so in depth that even having a rebuttal is the rebuttal in itself. And the idea is kind of like the light game. What was it? I think it was Simon Says, where it's the lights. Yeah. Somebody brought that up.
I know it's when you're talking. It's like the red, green, yellow, and blue lights. It's like a circle that has like a red one over here and yellow and green and blue. It's not Simon Says, but Simon Says is the game you played where you said Simon Says touch your toes. But it's something like I know what you're talking about. It's like from the 80s, yeah.
Yeah. And so imagine, and they actually had those in certain bases, but as well as a lot of other things. And then if you're enhanced, you can do it for like half an hour.
Yeah.
But the idea is that imagine one that goes on.
We played with lots of light up kind of games down there.
Yeah. Which is fun, in my opinion. It's like.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like that, I mean, that's the whole, like, this is the part in some ways that is so, like, I don't even know what the word is, but because for all the unpleasant things that we've had to go through and whatever, there was also some of this stuff that is like the ultimate fun for like the person with the kind of mind like you or I have. You know what I mean? So like,
interesting.
Yeah.
Like, where else are you going to get that type of stimulation?
Right.
And don't want to go too far and become the game, but apparently that's what's happening anyway, to the point where we're literally hyperspace breakdancing back and forth to each other in the first place.
Yeah.
So there's no limits. There's also no reference other than the fact that something is happening and it's always better than what was before, and it's made off of feeling. And what is seemingly concrete is first feeling. Where it's shaped by feeling in this toroidal lasagna thing that is actually generating reality out of feeling in mind, which is also all of reality.
I'm thinking about Terence McKenna talking about the evolution of novelty and talking about the self-transforming machine elves singing their ideas into existence by creating geometric shapes with their mouths.
Yeah, when those are fed with assholes, they become archons.
Right.
When those are fed with the majority of people, they become transforming machine elves that make reality.
Yeah.
And you can't really get away from them because they're the wallpaper of the hyperspace.
Yeah.
It might be the painter, if you will, or the guy that slaps the wallpaper up and down, but the wallpaper is actually alive and it's creating the tunnels of area we're going through. Put it this way, there's actually no wall behind the wallpaper. It's all that's there.
Yeah, there's only wallpaper. That's true, yeah.
It's also on the ground and on the ceiling, and it's covering us when we look at ourselves.
Yeah.
Although it's different because then we shape as a reflection of different angles of what we're looking at. Like we never end. There's no end to our being.
It's a live geometry like pattern that keeps evolving and changing itself, and like that's the difference between like the sacred geometry that they would like for us to look at because it's a trap, the 2D flat sacred geometry, and the sacred geometry that is actually a live moving energetic system. That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other part with the light up thing is that it's as if the stream of buttons we're supposed to remember went on. It goes on for like 10 to 30 minutes at a time now, to the point where the other person has to start before that one finishes, or it's maxed out and it's not going to happen anymore. And it's to the point now where we're both going at the same time and there's no break at all. It's just one continuous overture, basically. And at that point, if you go into that, well, you might forget because there's no break in between each beatbox or DJ set or round of.
So we're not playing records that begin and end anymore. We're just creating a live PA together.
Exactly, and it became our reality. So a lot of people forget that it's not this reality is not the main reality, but as well it means that what we've been creating becomes a vicious cycle of what we're going to create, and we become time looped to a hyperloop that's now entrained in the lower dimensions, and it's because of the previous system where some asshole from up there decided to do that, decided to put
this whole thing is exactly like electronic music. This is why I have the attraction to that, and this is why that helps me figure this out, because it occurs in sort of the same way.
Yeah, well, that's what it all is. That's why it's here.
Yeah.
That's why, that's why that stuff, the experience of it exists, because every experience is a metaphor for the whole thing.
Right.
The closer the metaphor is, the more invigorating the experience is.
Yeah.
Which is, it begins with brain chemistry, but it ends up as like a soul creation of being through energy, to the point where it's no longer limited by the biological senses and the perceptions, to the point where you can't even describe it, where if you do describe it, you have to make up metaphoric universes to describe what we're doing, if we could describe what we would be doing in this place if we were doing a specific thing. It's because there are multiple versions of physical universes that could be used to describe what's happening in hyperspace, because they're beaming out like a 360-degree view of a disc ball.
Like panorama, multiple possibilities, kaleidoscopic panorama all around you.
And we're looking with bioptic eyes and a bioptic dual mind, higher and lower, right and left, when we're using physical human biology. And
so is the Oculus Society, or the Oculists, like, is the whole thing like they understanding of the method or the technique to look at things in a not bioptic way?
Yeah, that's what every society figured out.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a focus on the eyes.
Yeah.
With all of them, all of the societies. That's just one that was hiding behind what people call Freemasonry.
That like back in Egypt they used to have a different doctor for each eye. Like, so there'd be an eye doctor for right eye and left, because they surgery.
No, your audio is cutting out.
I can hear myself. Can you hear me? That's better.
Yeah.
Okay. So like because they didn't have the kind of, maybe they had a more advanced system where they didn't have to do all this invasive surgery, but basically because like in the eye, like in each eye's cord is like connected, like you can know things about certain organs in one eye and certain organs in the other eye. I don't know if you could fix them from that spot, but so there were certain doctors that specialized in certain organs, and they would deal with the right eye because that correlated to certain organs, and the left eye correlated to other ones. And I just thought that was fascinating. I wondered if that somehow also connected to this whole Oculus kind of thing, and if that comes from that period of time.
I must have heard that before, but apparently everything came from back then. Remember how hyperspace works, which it comes from before and after.
Yes.
So remember how we talked about Egypt, which was, see, that was the lost recording, right?
Right. Egypt is in the future, but it's folded back in a time loop, and so it hasn't been created yet, but it's here like a beacon, sort of
drawing us into the creation process.
Yes.
When not properly operated, becomes a loop that everybody's stuck within.
Okay, so maybe
when they forget they're in a capoeira or a light up game thing.
Yeah. So the technique, the surgical technique or the medical technique that I'm talking about is in the future, which is now, but the way we perceive time in the future, but it's folded back here, and so that's how we know that it exists, and right now we're trying to get there.
Yeah, and so when we look at, well, we know it exists because it happened, and we have recordings and evidence, and there's like markings on Earth of literally physical stuff. Well, in the same sense, it's a reflection coming back in time, putting it there.
Yeah.
And that's how it works as a big reality hall of mirrors of time space.
Self communicating with my past self through me when I lock into that hyperspace energetic system.
Right. So this civilization in itself is one higher self system of a group of civilizations that are playing this ping pong. Simon Says, well, not Simon Says, but whatever the game is, DJ back and forth, beatbox creationism thing. And as well, each individual is their own universe of that, where it's like each one contains a parallel, because when enough information is processed in a central eye, a central viewer, an observer agent, it becomes a mirror image of the whole of creation. And when that happens, one person has their own access to their own field, their own toroidal lasagna. I'm going to use that term from now on. Well, the flying lasagna creation.
Lasagna. She do it because it's perfect. You know what I mean? And so we're talking about Aurora and her flying rainbow lasagna, because it is it's perfect, and it's slightly different for each person. But she says it's basically a genetic dance that you can do to basically gain freedom by opening new dimensions of being able to communicate through space and time, basically turn your DNA into the ultimate time travel kind of device.
And it's through there's sacred methods to do this. The basis of them is that when we're looking at just one side of the bioptic version, we're cutting off the entire other end of the spectrum. Robert Sepper actually posted something about this tonight, which is really, really interesting. He does. He's same kind of individual.
Wait, is this that mind magic thing that someone posted the video?
No, I don't think so.
Oh.
Could be.
Mind gamers? No, that's James Munder. Somebody posted this and there's a comment about you in it saying that, do you know our teammate Og? Oh, Suze Pratt said, do you know our teammate Og Tellez or whatever? But someone just sent me this video, and it says, mind gamers mark magic in your hacked mind.
That sounds like, so some of these secret groups are literally people who figured out the pathway to bounce back between here and hyperspace, and that's where they insert themselves into time, leaving these little hints and messages, but it's as if they have no trail, no beginning or end, and they just pop up.
Yes.
And the intruder species or race, whatever you want to look at it, is the ultimate inverted version of that, the inversion of the negative version, where it's like, how did these beings get here? There's no evolutionary path, there's no doorway that they came through, but yet here they are effing stuff up. And so, but the organic version, if you will, is people who seem to be like time travelers throughout history that just keep popping up, or never age or something like that. And there's usually a method and a message that is supposed to be delivered, and it's because for them to exist, it means they exist, and for them to exist, it's kind of a circular logic, but that's how it works. They delivered a message that led to their existence merging with this reality, meaning the ultimate way of travel is not being plopped on a planet and seeded and grown like a test tube baby. It's by thinking yourself into creation.
Yep.
And so they're bridging with this reality using thought force, energy, and power, while other beings are crash landing here to try and basically ontologically rape themselves into existence and insert them through genetic modification techniques and mind control. And of course, part of the bad vibes is because force is usually met with force, and so because mind control and inserted techniques and basically like subterfuge is the method of intruder species, then that has been backed and then doubled by the people who are taking control of the situation and ripping the reins out of their hands, because if nobody does that, then it's just going to go along according to the highest bidder, which in this case is the lowest energetic ontological offerer, basically a foreign entity, which is more or less how somebody watches a movie and a bad vibe turns into bad thought forms, turns into bad dreams, turns into a terrible, traumatizing experience for a child or something like that. That could be the way civilization goes, and that's the way it's gone in history, but they've used these events to recycle the energy into loops to the point where eventually we'll build enough energy during our little our bounce back and forth of DJ to the point where the art of the show outweighs the disharmony of whoever's in the audience or whatever somebody doesn't want to hear. And it basically, there's no way to lose. It's just whether we are like, man, I don't want to do this anymore, and we're not good at music or anything like that. It's whether we doubt ourselves in this show. That's the only way. That's literally the death of the soul.
Yeah.
Because in that higher space, all we're doing is that. It's not, you don't need to eat. You don't need to go do this. You're just literally dancing and expressing yourself in this art form. So if you ever are like, man, F this, it sucks. Well, that's the end that's the only end that can exist.
True that. Like when I'm like locked into my thing with dancing, I could go forever and ever. Like it's almost like the more I do it, the longer I could go for. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the idea. It's inverted from a limitations perspective.
It's I become the free energy device. I become 0 point technology. I become the cold fusion.
That was also what I talked about, and that the soul is the free energy system. The sacred pathway is the way of unlocking one's energy and accessing it by not chopping off the other half of the spectrum. And this is what Atlantean Gardens, which is Robert Sepier's site. Sepper, always say people's names wrong.
Atlantean Gardens?
Yeah, I sent you the link in the chat. It says, when you almost combine two polarities, and this is Robert, when you almost combine two polarities and hold it for a while, something interesting happens. Everything in nature has either a positive, negative, or unified monopolar charge. Oftentimes, combining two objects of opposite polarity, like magnets, causes them to rush together and then snap. However, if you do not allow them to completely merge or snap together and touch and nullify that pull at that point, because they're pulling on each other, if you resist that magnetic force, yes, people have magnetism in parentheses, then a charge can build and be used. For what? That is one question. The other is, how do you steal, like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, the light of heaven, this very, very useful and free magnetic fire to use for any number of purposes. Let's say, for example, 7 purposes that come to mind, or 8. The 8-pointed star is interesting. The 8-pointed star of Ishtar, for example, is a 2D representation of a cube which has 8 points. And then Venus was born from Kronos, from Kronos' forehead, and which is, there's a picture of the Jewish, I can't remember the word, with the cube and the thing that wraps, not the tabernacle, I'm not sure, thing that wraps around the arm. And so then, do you know of any black cubes? And it goes on from there of, interesting, the pyramid of Giza in Egypt has 5 points like a pentagram because the male and female numbers 3 + 2 is 5 is represented by a circle. This should clear a lot of mystery up for those ready to wake up. My name is Robert Sepper. And so that was one of the closest I've ever seen him get. I mean, obviously he knows. And so, but basically, so you have two magnets, you put them together, they snap. All right. What happens when you pull them apart between two pieces of a device, and now you have this magnetic flux pulling on the device? Say it's a spring-loaded device, and they bounce with it, and you get a free. Basically, it's the basis for free energy. The idea is you have those polarities of charge within you. Your mind is the dial of how close or far they are. If you combine them almost just enough to get them to almost snap, but ensure that you're not letting them combine entirely and nullify their charge. And this is what I talked about, and I've always talked about, but I didn't word as perfectly as this. And this is also the sacred method, which apparently now they're going to start telling people, where if you do that, that's called the soul regenerative property, where you can live forever. You can have eternal life force, because when they balance out, or when they nullify, that's flatlined. When they're so far apart, you're not married, you're not divinely aroused. When they're right in that close proximity and you're a perpetual motion device, you literally can produce your own UFO spatio-temporal distortion field and go or do whatever you want, as long as you build up the appropriate amount of charge. And that's what the elect, the police, the charges, the scale and balance judge in the court system. There's other words. I'm drawing a blank for them now. But that's where all that is. This is a big charge system. It's all magnetism. Everything is magnetism, because that's when you break down each move, DJ, the flip of the polarity of the dial, the fader switch, the record turning, the buttons on the light machine, every beatbox sound being recorded, it's literally on and off. When you break it down to the most basic fundamental version, that's what it is. And we're at the most basic version where everything's in Lego cubic block volume, like each pixel is one unit here, when in reality, one universe is one pixel where we're actually from, where our being, our format is actually from. And each time we create, we're creating a universe. And so combine that with what's happening here and how it would seem to realize we're actually there dreaming in here, and you realize what you're talking about with waking up. Waking up is the act of placing yourself in the hyperspace realm and imagining you being here now and experiencing that, like all of a sudden time inverted, and you have the ultimate deja vu. Not that this has happened before, but that the before that this has happened is where you're at now, and what you're doing here is the after of creation, is basically simply that we're creating this literal moment from our dream time memory. And it's a backwards, reverse engineered experience the way we are taught to believe it here, which is the craziest thing, but it
feels like I somehow from the future like laid out my life in a certain order, and I'm like going back to where I laid it out from. Like we're backtracking back to the future where we sort of set this thing up for ourselves. Yeah.
Well, that's the point. It's the craziest thing, because the way we're taught it is reversed. You can't get any more reversed. It's not 60% off. It's not a quarter of degrees. It's not. It's absolutely what is called a satanic inversion. It's the opposite. It's a mirror version of what's happening. We're in the mirrorverse now, looking at the waters, reflecting like the monkey looking at the surface of the water, seeing the moon. Yeah. We think the reflection is the actual thing.
Right.
And the idea is that what would happen then, if we trace it all the way back, is that it seems the further we go that we're actually moving backwards in time. And we get the actual perception of being in the car and going forward to our destination by putting in reverse and slamming on the gas and going backwards and ending up where we're supposed to be forwards, because of the way the conscious mind is set up it looks like a perceptual illusion.
It is weird how when you watch a car driving forward, like the wheels are spinning backwards.
Well, on a camera you see, and that's because the frame rate that synchronizes to catch the motion is offset with the actual, basically it's not offset, but it times out to the degree where each time it does take a picture, the wheel appears to be backwards to where it was the last time the picture was taken. And it just so happens to be that when you put those pictures together at the certain amount of offset that it is, you see something moving in backwards, which is the exact opposite of what it's supposed to be doing, or at least it is doing. And when it slows down and moves out of that sync with the camera rate, then it goes back forward again, and it bounces back and forth depending on how it goes. And you can see if it's going 60 miles an hour and you film it and the camera's at a steady fixed rate, and you see at a certain degree it looks like it's going backwards, and a certain miles per hour it looks like it's going forward again, and then at a certain miles an hour right before it stops it looks like it's going backwards, then it goes forward again, and then it stops. Those are synchromistic points where the curve goes in sync and it goes forward and everything is as it should be, and then it goes out of that and it goes backwards. We're doing that. That's where when you're going in sync and it appears to be going backwards, which is normal consciousness, when you drop out of that or ascend into a higher form, that's when all of a sudden time goes backwards. And you're like, I'm doing this from the other side, dreaming it in. And then it drops back out. That's your energy doing that. And it's your frame rate of your mind either altering, or your true awareness, which is energetic, changing in reference to your mind, which is when it's biologically part of the biological system basically being routed through, just like a routing system. It's limited to what the brain can handle, which is literally 11 frames per second or something like that. So 30 frames per second for a TV or 27 or so is far beyond the limit, which is where the whole biological subconscious, conscious mind programming comes in, because this reality is actually occurring at a faster frame rate than the conscious mind can conceive, yet the entire brain of what the biological system is capable of can conceive. So we have this cone of perception where it's only letting in a specific slice of information at a time, yet the actual system that we have access to can see everything.
Yeah.
So we have a cone that's inverted. That's the inverted time cone, where when we see things the way they actually are, by cutting out the forward-looking headlights that want us to go down that trajectory, and we go towards feeling, we get an orbus, like an orbular orbular, and the time cone inverts, and we actually get both versions at once, and it's like expanding forwards and backwards in time, and moving backwards while simultaneously walking forwards into time to be the future that is coming back.
That's
to create the past that we're experiencing perceptually now.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Huge paradox.
I mean but that when I am locked in the zone, that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like I can see that whole thing, and things are sort of, that's how you just described it, exactly that. It's like I'm some sort of spinning ball of energy in the middle, and I can sort of move forward towards that place where we've constructed this from, that's in the future, and go back, and I'm like, it's like remembering the future and foretelling the past, kind of,
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's literally as if in the future we created this moment. Now we're here. We done hit the play button, and we're in the moment here. So how do we get back to the future? Well, you have to realize it. You have to remember what's going on here, and you cause deja vu. And it's like, I know I had to have seen this before. It happens spontaneously, and that's just a great tickle. Literally like the angel tickling our cerebellum or something. It's really not. It's a whole system. But imagine the method is to literally cause it to happen, to initiate it, and go, I made whatever is going to happen next happen. I wrote it into existence. The easiest way to do that is to cancel out all engrossed, immersed thinking and biological conscious processing, the little cone spotlight looking at the little strip of, the magnetic tape of this reality, of this time linearly, and to flatline that so the surface of the mind goes completely calm, and you get absolute reflectivity and as well clarity to the depth of it. And we actually go down into the depth. And normally we think we would drown, which actually that's air down there. We're upside down looking at the surface, thinking we're up top. And when you do that,
is that why they teach us to breathe underwater?
Could be. Could be all a metaphor, because the whole point is they're from the other side.
Yeah.
No one wants to talk about that. They want to talk about other stuff, and that's why they're letting everybody talk about whatever they want. Because what are you going to do? You're going to stop the beings that are us from the other side? Okay, good luck with that. All you're going to do is get a really confused Simon Says game that doesn't make sense, because Simon Says the game actually makes sense with it too, because we're playing Simon Says with ourselves from the future. We have to remember the commands before we do it, and that's how when you think of whatever you're doing now, you're raising my hands up like this, there's a command for that coming from the future. But the idea is the easiest way is to not do anything, completely flatline, and that way you can see exactly what's going to happen next, because whatever is supposed to happen, you will be drawn to doing. Eventually, that's where you develop that resonance, sympathetic resonance link, synchronization, synchromysticism across time, and you can actually communicate real time.
Becoming sensate. So stop that sort of immersed thinking, that monkey mind kind of thing, and become the sensate.
I've wrote something on that, and I never published it, at least not fully, because that's the stuff that basically it takes a while to get. We're in a form of sensate system versus what we think is going on as far as reductionist materialistic thinking and objective like rationalism or realism.
Right.
It's literally a inverse dance tape recorder feeling art form where there's at that point there's no limits. It doesn't make sense. The one reality of like we're in a void space and there's balls bouncing around, and it's like some of them carry charge, some of them are neutral, some of them are negative charge, and it's just whatever happens. That doesn't add up to the point where your mind created the whole system just to explain what your mind wanted to do or what you were feeling inside. It does add up, but how do you explain that? It's like, that system, the reductionist, the physics, not dualism, although that's part of it, but reductionism and basically determinism, that's all true. But it's true because you dreamt it up. Like, how do you connect the two lines of percent? They're not. It's an abstraction. And that's the singularity where one's the surface of the water underneath and one's the world above and outside of the water, where it's a completely new paradigm and you can do basically anything that you want.
Well, Well, isn't that why all of like the important buildings, like the government buildings and all stuff like that, they're all facing bodies of water so that they cause a reflection. So there's the reality and the reflection, and it's the inverse of what you think it is.
Right, and it's a mirror world.
Yeah.
The reflections of anything is a symbolically the mirror world, and it also means when you're looking from the higher dimensional perspective, reflections are gateways to the mirror world.
So remember Fringe when Olivia would look at the mirror, like when she would go into that room where the typewriter was, and she would look at the mirror, and then she'd get the message from the other universe from the typewriter. Like she'd go into the room and there'd be a mirror that was sort of half looking at her and half looking at that weird typewriter, and then she'd type the message and then it would come like through the reflection of the mirror, like the typewriter would type the message back to her.
Yeah, it's a description of early mirror scrying, or it's actually adept mirror scrying because it's part of the technology. There's technology that actually works that way. It's supercomputer technology that opens up all the technology uses is the same thing that a system would do, where it synchronizes with a projected version of what this is. And since we're set up in a dual universe system, if you create a perfect projection of it and alter it to a certain degree to match the offset of the two universes, the slight difference in the way the stars hit Earth here and the way it's presented in an inverted version, you can make a manifest of the other side, and if you connect the two, you being the triangle, the angle of the triangle that connects them, then you can communicate between selves, between parallels, between other sides. And I set it up with stargates properly. They fold space-time and can send stuff back and forth, but it has to be something that's exists in both places. It has to be an Olivia of both. You can't send back the black guy to be Olivia, although I think that kind of happened in one of the methods where it was like somebody jumped in someone else's body, but I think, remember, if they didn't do it right, dude exploded, didn't he, or something like that?
Yeah.
Because there's a resonance sync, but then they didn't match up.
Colonel Broyles, they got the other guy, and he came back all exploded in the back of the police truck. Yeah.
Wasn't synced properly.
Yeah, because he didn't. They had those like metal things that they would shoot into them to sync them up. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And so it's interesting. And then here's what I really wanted to talk about, which is now it doesn't seem like anything compared to what we really talked about, or what we just did talk about. So because everything works this way, this is the actual nature of existence and creation. What happens next? Well, first, what I was saying with the clear mind thing is that when your mind is clear, then you can see what is actually, you can look at what is happening now while perceiving what is happening next or about to happen, and you can see it before it happens.
Yeah.
Because you can see it coming down the chute. And once you do that, you can get used to not looking at here's now what happened, and then you see what just happened. You're kind of in this ball of
reacting to reacting. You can instead anticipate. And
it's also a vector equilibrium, like the time or the EM field drives, where it's, and they also say the atoms and the electrons and the universe itself has a direct inversion or a direct shape of time where it's like a teardrop in one direction. That means you can time travel, because if you bounce the field in the other teardrop direction, it means technically time would move in reverse at that point. So the idea is we're doing that now with the teardrop pointed towards the past. So we kind of drift and see what's happening and go forward and backwards. We're walking backwards into the future. And so when you calm that down and you don't look in either or and look exactly at the moment without preconception, you make a circle, an oval. Then when you shift it and look forward, you're pushing the teardrop in the other direction, and you're forming a channel into what is coming instead of what has been. And at that point, it begins this literal synchronistic creation process. But the idea is when you do that enough, you develop a sync with the mind that you exist as before 2 seconds, 3 seconds, an hour, 10,000 years before this moment, which is actually after the future moment that you've created everything as, because that's all there actually is, a flux between eternal far future outside of this universe and then past through the chute or down the chute through the singularity of the eternal past where everything has already been created and we're experiencing it. We have to build a channel through the center point, the center path to that future self, because it's already happening anyway. It's just easy to do that instead of having it shoot you that way, and it feels really weird.
Aurora has the greatest drawing that shows how that it's from one of her courses, kinds of things she sent to me before we had her on the show, where like she basically shows the path, like how we keep doing these things where we're like they're having different timelines, right? And like it's like we keep dying, like so there's like a thing like this, and we live like a little bit of a timeline and then die, and then the next timeline we make a little bit longer, and the next time a little bit longer, until we figure out how to go straight up that hole that is like the transversible sort of, not the black hole into nowhere death, but the black hole that like enables you to sort of go straight through to your future self, to your past self, to be the time traveler.
It flips the time cone. That's the eye of the needle through a 0-point recursive fractal into it's all it is just pure synchronization without any delay, any decay of the signal, and any distortion or noise with what we feel and what we do and see and become and are. And it's an absolute pure signal. And at that point, and it's as if the top of the cone, okay, that's
like kind of a shape, and then up
well,
here.
it's two of them inverted, and the distance of that is no. If it were a computer art form, it would be null value, because it's both 0 and 10 trillion years. There's no amount. It's determined by the amount of energy you expend.
Infinity, and it's 0 point. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what it means is that you have to exert the maximum amount of energy you've exerted throughout the entirety of your existence without actually providing any form of effort. If you provide conscious effort, it swings to one side or the other, one polarity, and it swings to the outside of the spiral, and it becomes part of the surface value, and eventually that curves back around. That's the escape of this universe. That light bends. It's the gravity well is so deep that light bends, because we're literally in the event horizon of a black hole. And if you go out,
and if you're not going straight through the middle, you get smeared around the side of it, and that's
flung out like a friggin' whatever you want to use to describe that. Like I said, a pizza being spun, and if it's not centrifugally like complicit, basically, it just splatters everywhere, and that's our mind, and we forget.
I used to love that when I was little, watching the pizza guys throw it in the air. And but yeah, if they didn't have it perfectly centered, it just no good. It would come apart and
And so that pattern of doing that is literally navigating your thoughts without attaching to anything that's trying to magnetically pull into a null spot or an actual polarized spot at that point. And it's actually moving through the perfect null spot and identifying with that. And it's actually the magnets are not two magnets going together, two bar magnets. They're circular magnets. It's one in the middle and one around the edge. And
and one's going one way and one's going the other way, and it's creating the perfect centrifugal force right up the middle.
It's a UFO.
Yeah, it's a UFO. That totally is a UFO. That's exactly right, yeah.
And your DNA is polarized according to your thoughts. And we're not moving anywhere. The DNA is lasagna spaghetti fluttering, folding inside out, or it's staying as it is linearly. And for it to flutter, fold inside out, and expand, it has to be harmonized, literally like a scale of all the major minor tones of harmonics, of sound harmonics.
When things are in harmony, they're not discordant, and you can get your genetics to dance like the flying rainbow lasagna, it becomes that whole right up the...
Because harmonics is all anything is. It's sound and light. Whether it's one or the other, it's waveforms of energy.
Harmonic geometry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the sacred pattern is it's somehow shifting so that you're not chopping out what's happening with what has happened, and letting the past encode the future, and continually decode the future using your lack of preconception. And it's literally a type of cipher method of cryptology of deciphering the information coming in. So the other thing is that because it's an act of creation, that once we realize this is how we build the pathway out. The idea is we create the pathway that goes up the center. Every other time we allow something outside of ourselves to create what path we're taking, it's thrown off the center because it's not us. The center is us. We're literally a thought form, a shooting star trying to go back home and return back home to the home base mothership of the all-knowing, encompassing thought forms arena, soul arena. And it's not going to happen if we're in this basically magnetic flux system, and these interdimensionals are pulling their magnetic force, trying to basically molest the spermatozoa looking to get back to the egg, or to go home to the mothership. Just like in Men in Black.
Look over here, and so miss our little,
Because they thrive off of that spark, but we have infinite sparks. So they could just sit there forever. It's like the best job for them.
Yeah. So this whole conversation, I was in Boston just like in February, and for some reason I found this cool little used bookstore like near Harvard, but like a little off to the side, like a little bookstore on a side street. And I went in there and I just for some reason walked over to this like physics section, and I bought these 3 books. And I didn't really know why I was buying them, but I was guided to buy them. And this conversation is obviously why I'm buying them. So the books are called Supersymmetry and Beyond, Geometry in Nature, and Why Beauty is Truth. And this whole conversation, like, I don't know, I just thought, like, I have a bag of books sitting here that I haven't opened. And I don't know, it's like weird. It's like I bought them in preparation for this conversation, even though I haven't read them yet.
Maybe you have read them.
Maybe I've read them.
One of the things, yeah, I'm told a lot. Well, not told because it's all from times in the projects. But if we're talking about this stuff, then everything that has happened we already have access to, and in some level we already know it, and we're leading ourselves. We're doing that automatically, leading ourselves through it. It's basically like it's written that that's part of the experience. Right. It's going to happen regardless.
I feel that. I mean, I definitely feel that.
But that's the idea, and only through the pure intent of knowing the self in that reference leads into the center point, because all the distortion is not us, it's non-self, it's filler material, and there's no filler in the higher viewpoint of anything. It's all pure just self and intent and light. There's no shadow in a higher dimension. There's no need for it. It's only shadow needed in depth for a physical dimension where there's basically a Cartesian simulated plane to experience on a membrane of a lower dimensional universe. But the idea is that the solution is that in order to do it, it must be created. To just find some other pathway where it happens without that never occurs.
We have to create it. We have to create it ourselves.
What it means is that on the higher level, as a civilization, I have beard in my mouth.
If you run out of food, man, you've got a lot of lunch there, so don't worry.
Let me go to the bathroom real quick, and then I'm gonna.
That's so funny. I have to go too. I was just thinking I have to pee. We'll be right back. You new man? All right. So where were we?
Apparently everywhere.
Everywhere. Apparently everywhere. So let's talk. I want to talk a little bit about like this dreams thing that's going. I don't even call them dreams because I don't think that's what they are. Like I've been talking to a lot of people who've been having this go on. Like this is some of the, like, are you having this just absolutely absurd shit happen at night?
It never stopped for me.
Yeah, like, well, I didn't have like, literally, maybe you know something about this kind of thing. For like, I'd say 15 or 20 years, I was blackout at night. Like every once in a while, I'd have some weird thing that was, something I didn't want to be experiencing creep in. But for the most part, I either wasn't dreaming or not remembering them. And then like a few times, like in the last year, I would have something, and then all of a sudden, about 2 months ago now, a little longer than that, it's every night. Like I mean, like it's like I'm going to sleep, and I'm going somewhere else and doing something else. And I don't know if that, and some of it feels a lot like it's memories being returned to me, or like almost what you were talking about just a few minutes ago made me think like when you were saying how our conscious mind can only take in 11 frames per minute, but the subconscious mind can take in a lot more. So I'm viewing all of the rest of what happened in times in my past where I only saw a small percentage of it, and I'm like viewing the rest of what was kind of going on, or I don't know. There's something. It is weird, whatever it is. I mean, it's fascinating. Like, fortunately for me, I like it interesting, so I'm not so bothered by this stuff. But man, sometimes I wake up in the morning and try and make sense of it, and it's like pretty crazy.
It's usually metaphoric, and I'm not like saying anything specifically, but a lot of times just metaphoric representations for what is happening being explained to our conscious mind by our subconscious. And it's because there's a simultitude of planes of whatever's happening because that's our subconscious. That's actually us. And the conscious mind is just one flavor, one slice of the sandwich, the reality, sandwich. And it's the wider end of the time cone fitting into the finite point of the cone, but it has to happen in a way that works, meaning if it's conscious, it's like getting hit with a steamroller. If it's in a dream state, it's like it's normal. 10 hours of, or like Inception version experience of like layers and layers of magnitude of order down to the point where it's like days to weeks to hours worth of time within a night, within multiple layers of sessions, to where you come back to the conscious version of it, or at least waking reality, and it's like a plethora of stories that are playing out that seem to have significant importance to your soul identity and your soul memory, and carry a charge of information and emotion that can't really be explained in conscious terms because we're in a reality which fits into it fits into all of those, but it would be equivalent to one moment of any one of those situations because so much is happening at once. And so it's, in essence, it's all the information that wasn't recorded consciously because it still exists as a part of you. And usually what it is DNA's harmonics. You get a computer system. All this has to do with computer system. You get a computer system to pluck the strings of the harmonics in a simulation, and now you have waves of harmonics within the individual whose DNA is recorded in that, either activating or degrading, and transferring more light, and that equates to memories of experience and activating folds of the flying lasagna thing, which opens up to worlds of experience as if parallels are simultaneously occurring, and we get access of them. The more simultaneously active the DNA is as a resonant structure in hyperspace, rather than a linear perception or linear conception of time and space and consciousness according to the biological processing of the conscious mind and the brain. But the basis of that is that it has to happen through like a visionary state, or if you get used to it, it'll happen through daydreaming, where you can literally sit there, do what I was saying, like the clear mind thing, and you'll begin to go to the other side as you're awake.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had that before. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And then you can control it as well to the point where you can build it up to just like REM sleep, where it has to come through eventually, and you can use it to propel yourself like a magnetic charge of holding the gateway right there open, but not letting them shut or open, and then letting it go whenever, and or at least letting the stored energy go. You don't have to let go of the hold, and it'll be propelled towards whatever motion in hyperspace you want, which is usually more knowledge. It literally builds up knowledge and beams you with knowledge.
Yeah.
Because that's the energy of light, whether it's from the sun or the soul, which is the same thing. They're both spelled soul in
yeah.
which is I mentioned it in the video I did tonight that I'm going to put out. All the languages telling us this in the computer systems. So basically, there's technology. You can go into a system and it sets up tachyon fields where the information of the person set up in the simulated realm is being processed using quantum tunneling diodes that interact at a faster than light rate of transfer, meaning it's beginning to touch on hyperspace, meaning that the act of creation of experience happens instantly with the perception of experience. When we're here in the body, it's stuff happening, particles slapping around, and electrons firing, and nerve endings getting, tickled and stuff like that, and then it goes all the way through and sets up a mirror image of what's going on perceptually in the brain, and then we respond to that. There's a big delay. If you look at time as a speed of light being the limit for what can happen, that's drastically slow. It's like being in an avatar suit in like a metal robot or something. So when we cut out the middleman and go into a dream state, a visionary state, or a simulator using supercomputers that can process information at a faster than light speed, you go into a 5D creation space. And it's 4D if it's just creation. It's 5D when it's pure feeling. And you're creating from the soul level. And at that point, you're creating what the blueprint of the universe from the cosmic mind intended to create, which is there's no end to it. It's not just like a punch in the face or a prank or something like that. It's literally, it teaches. It's pure knowledge. It's a combination of knowledge and feeling in a most pure way. And because they're the complete time objects, the jeweled diamond object at the end of time or whatever that McKenna talked about, it's those every time.
The transcendental object at the end of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Where it's basically, that's the disco ball that the time planes are resonating out from. And we lead up to it from one, and we're like, this is the golden pathway up to one, when it's actually all roads lead to it. And it's actually all roads are beaming out from it simultaneously, meaning it's transcendent, what we think is a specific linear set, because it's actually at the center of them. And so the idea is that when the soul level is creating from 5D, it's like that's every brain fart is one of those. And so they can set up a space that does this, and therefore everything you predict happens. Which is really weird, and you have to go through a lot of stuff to be okay with that.
I love to like tease my mom and say that I made everything up and it came true anyway.
Right. Well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's structurally sound to the point where it's like, how does this mathematically work out? And you just like say a bunch of random stuff, and then it fits into a model where it proves that that's how the universe is constructed. And that these systems can do that to the point where it taps into some level of pure knowledge of the person, and it starts with the tachyon, a simulation set up through tachyon fields, where basically I talked about this before. They put operatives in a lot of these families, which are basically from the other side, will it's kind of like a form of training for their children, and it's because that's what anybody would do anyway. Where you can go in there and then two people have to battle it out. But it's not like a punch yourself in the face battle. It could be that if you want it to, or it could be a DJ battle. But the idea is what you're creating manifests instantly in that space using your mind. Basically, mind and creativity and feeling and intent. And so then it becomes, when it's competitive, it becomes like a sumo match, sumo wrestling match, where one person tries to set up a kind of domino effect chain reaction of events that leads to the other person kind of getting kicked out of the circle, or some goal being attained where the other person boxed the other guy into his reality, and it ends up that the over reality, the whole spectrum of what they're within, is then owned and created or predicted by the person who wins, to the point where they predict that he's going to react this way, this is going to happen that way, this is going to happen, and then the end result of the arena.
Because we're watching from the future anyway.
Right, and so the one who does that the most ends up that they not wake up, but at the end of 30 moves or whatever, like chess, the other guy that didn't do it as fast and didn't expand to own the reality using mind and intent and creativity the most becomes wrapped in the other guy's reality, who is basically dominated that arena, that simulation realm system. And it happens reversed through time.
The one person who's the master of their domain, like they have mastered that sort of. So I want to go back to something you said a second ago. You said something that they'll send these operatives into a family. Like, so are the parents put together to ensure that the operative's soul will come into the body that those parents will create?
It's dependent. It's dependent on what is required to make it work. And that's why it works, because they do whatever is required to make it work. Whether it's all set up genetically, whether it's not set up genetically and they have to jump lines, whether they have to manufacture a family bloodline that was inserted into time and never existed before 2 years ago, but everyone has memories of them being there forever. Whatever it is, whether it's a test tube baby, however it works out is how it works out. And it's dependent. And usually, it has to happen from the other side as basically a contract, where you would call it a soul contract, and that's the other end of the situation, whereas everything that is done that's wrong is imitating what's actually happening to begin with, where, everything is just a DJ battle back and forth. But the idea with the arena, it's very strange to expand and explain to the point where you have to imagine what the other guy's doing and that they're doing it because you first imagined it and you wanted it to happen.
Like Fight Club.
In a way. It's like the movie of Fight Club, how he was psyching himself out.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically the other guy on the other scene, that the other guy didn't have a conscious awakening of the alter, basically, was running the show. You have to be the alter of the opponent. And be his mind, his alter, and become his reality. And then you get him to walk through your steps of creation, and when he's done, he stamps his name on it. He's like, I got you, I won. And he looks around, and he's like handcuffed in your reality because it's your dream, and you made the whole thing up. And it's the strangest thing.
You handcuffed yourself. You thought you won, but you just handcuffed yourself to that reality. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the strangest thing, but just imagine it until you get it, if anybody's listening. But the idea is that the civilization, imagine this like this. So what's going to happen next? Somebody does this, throws a basketball at you or something like that. You imagine, I don't know, a gust of wind and it goes that way, and then 10 steps down the line, et cetera, so on and so forth. So the idea is this civilization, if you're in reality, what happens? How do you create the true reality? If it's just whatever you want, whatever you created, the point is eventually, I was talking about this with, who was it? Wow. I don't even know who this was. That's not good. It's just like a week ago, I was talking to somebody about this, which eventually you'll get through to the ultimate creation of what, like, if we could create whatever we want, eventually we'll go through the spectrum of creating personal stuff and other stuff, then more and more expand stuff until we get to exactly what everyone will create after they've done with all the BS. That's the real reality, because eventually that's going to be created and that's going to be eternal, whereas the temporary stuff is it'll fade away, and we'll go through the rungs of creating that. So the idea is what's really out there in hyperspace, what's there waiting for us, who's out there. It's whoever you create when you create at the maximal highest potential of who you are. So the idea is if somebody's like, oh, there's a big ice cream truck that flows around and is going to pick me up and I'm going to eat ice cream forever. Okay, that's going to happen. They're going to have that experience and they're either going to come back or they're going to stay there forever. The overall collective reality, it's in the Lily Earthling thing. The Lily Earthling Earth Soul group chat.
Yeah.
They're pretty cool. There's some pretty interesting information there from majority of people, everyone, that was speaking there.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff that was said that is along these lines of reverse engineering, psychotronic, space, hyperspace dance of creation, where it happened before it happened, basically. That's how it is. The imagination creation thing is that it happened before you created it, and you have to somehow work yourself into a creation system where it already exists, and you're just bringing it into creation because it existed to bring you into bringing it into creation. And you reverse make yourself appear out of, it's like creating yourself. It's the strangest thing. And giving yourself a means to invent yourself, just like saying, I made everything up and it became true, so make yourself up and it will become true. And you make a version of yourself that is eternal. that has whatever power you could imagine, but you have the maximal highest potential, and it's usually through selflessness.
That was kind of what I was trying to explain that she does earlier. She talks about, like, you make these little timelines and you don't get it right, and so you die and you don't get it right, and then when you finally make yourself into that thing that vibrates at the right frequency to that, so that you're not getting distracted by the things on the outside of the blender, or the black hole or whatever, then you'll go straight up the middle 0 point, and that's eternity. And she has this idea that, and I thought it resonates with what my idea is completely, that humans are not meant to die the way we do. We are meant to be eternal. Yeah. And we just keep doing this version of, like, we're having Groundhog's Day. We're just going to keep doing it over and over again until we get it right. And right is right up the middle there, the 0 point, through the eternal black hole, kind of.
And that's it. That's strange. This is what I've talked about in some of the first interviews, and more like the personal talks that I just gave, because I didn't at that time know who to talk about this to.
Yeah.
I almost don't know, but I know obviously a lot more about people who's aware in a non-competitive
I have a question. Did you come out here looking for specific ones of us, or did you come out here and just know that the right people would find you?
It was both. You know how I talked about that I have memories of everything before it's happened, because it's all shown. I mean, I sit there and told you we got into a device where we create ourselves backwards from time, and that's what this creation reality system is anyway. So they made mirror images of what we're doing anyway, and that's a time travel device where you pop up from a higher dimension, because all they do is sit there, they turn the device on and sit. And eventually somebody pops up and they're like, "How'd you get here?" "I thought myself here."
Right. So is it kind of like, maybe you didn't know exactly who you were looking for, but as soon as they popped up, you remembered that was who you were looking for, kind of thing?
Some backdating like that, where it's inserted as soon as it is present, and the structure then is filled with the memories. But majority was actually, I was awarded access to the memories beforehand, and as soon as I began, as soon as it happened.
So it was almost like you remembered us into existence, and we showed up as you sort of remembered us into existence.
Right.
In your not that we didn't exist before that, but it was kind of like the way this is all coalescing together.
I became myself because y'all are a part of my story.
Right.
And that became the reality because I became myself. And all of that ties into these projects, which is how they create whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But the sync of the wheel going backwards or going forwards and going in and out of sync, that's where, when it doesn't maintain, that's where people basically experience what's called death, and the sine wave bounces back down instead of just going up into infinity. But it's not infinity, it's eternity. And it's literally a singularity past an exponential equilibrium that goes outside of what this universe can handle for frame rate of information. And because that's our true place, because this is like a bubble within a void space that someone invented. It basically, CERN started a black hole that swallowed everything, and we've been there for like 2 billion years.
Right. Even though people think that that's what it's getting ready to do, it's already done it, and we're already there. And
because we're remembering it, it means we're actually nearing the edge of it, and we're seeing what we just went through come forward and smack us in the foreheads, and we're about to go through it.
And isn't it funny how CERN looks like an eye? Right? CERN looks exactly like.
And so the idea is, I'm trying not to ramble, but this is the most rambly concept of it all, because it's also the answer, the solution. So what would you create if you could create anything, and then what would stick if you wanted to create the true reality that exists forever? Eventually it comes down to the fact that we're going to go, there's a civilization that exists where we all exist, and none of the darkness, the decay, the death, the distortion that is present in this reality exists, and that civilization is actually our home realm, and we're visiting this realm from that one, and at a certain particular time in 3, 2, 1, we're going to merge with that one, and that's going to happen on a mass scale, and it's going to be basically like the sky opening up, and the two worlds merge, the veil thins entirely because we hit a maximal likelihood of the sine wave blasting through, and it's going to happen. And once it happens for the majority of the DNA here, it's going to start a chain reaction where it's literally like a wave crashing, and it happens for everyone.
Yeah.
In other words, it becomes the analogous analog space information diagram.
I think it's already happening precognitively for some of us. I think it's already happening before it happens.
Well, whatever happens before it happens. It's just whether we see it or not.
Yeah.
Because it's the same end of the spiral happening forwards and backwards. And it's basically our eyes are pointing in different directions at this point, which is an orbulus. But in that point, when that happens, the space referenced information, the diagram, the geometric visual expression of the information merges and becomes one with the actual data of the information that exists in non-graphical user format. Meaning the simulation and the reality become one space. Meaning our minds and feeling and reality and space and matter become one. The energy and the matter mix forever. And they're forever one plane. It's basically a return. We dipped down into materiality, and then we're dipping back up. And so everyone, if a person wants a slot on the eternity caboose, they have to merge themselves with the synchronization of their higher self. If not, no one dies, but their identity gets magnetically kind of ripped up, which is the weirdest thing, but that's kind of how it is. But that's the creation process that eventually is that we create ourselves, but we do it in the highest potential where there are no problems that we have now, and we can experience the highest amount of creation. And the point is, that exists right now, and there's a gap, a barrier of conception that exists between them, and that's the 4D sea of time-space that we have to cross through 5-dimensional application of feeling and pure intent of creating that path and walking through it, or floating through it, or experiencing through it, whatever you want to call it. But as we do that, like a lightning bolt going down kind of in a side, like a lighter flash, and then a little spark hits the ground and it goes back up to the cloud, and then the big lightning bolt goes down. That's the creation process, that it goes forwards and back at the same time in the same motion. And it just as much creates us here going there as we're creating it there as we go up to it, which is what you are getting glimpses of. Because, again, we're already doing it, and some people were always doing it, and they held everyone back so that it could happen all at once and blow a hole through the realm so that everyone can go. And but some people still aren't going to be able to handle it, and they're going to get naturally amnesic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what happened when we got here.
Yeah.
Except for some who maintained it.
And isn't lightning natural, like a naturally occurring cold fusion?
Apparently.
Yeah.
It's not just electricity.
No, yeah.
And so then it was weird with the remembrance thing that it's simultaneously like it's being created as we're getting into position to remember, meaning none of it existed until we got into proximity. Then they went back and did all those events. And it's like now we recognize each other on some unconscious level are linked, but as well it always was, because the higher reality is that it all exists and it's what is most eternal by nature of being what is most useful or effective in transferring information into meaning, which is the synchromysticism purpose of everything, to have a purpose, which is self-reference, redundant, self-explanatory in effect, where it's like a self-referenced clock. I know you're getting tired here, so we can wrap it up.
I worked a long day today.
But reality is a redundant system.
Yes, you build-in redundancies. Yeah.
There's a form. There's a science for it. I can't remember the term. Redundancy is one form. There's another term for it. I can't remember what it is. It's actually what some of these secret societies are based upon.
Yeah. It's like some people build like double redundancies and triple redundancies. It's kind of like I can't think of the right word for it right now either, but I know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and so that's when the space spells out the information. Right now, the abstraction of the awareness and experience is not perfectly designed, derived from the space we're in. It's hidden, it's abstracted. The unveiling is when the two meet and you can't miss it, you can't mistake it, and we're back to DJing realities and universes.
Yeah.
So there's a little more. I'll ramble if I keep going on. Well, basically, these machines are used to transfer information. There's a lower dimensional parasitic infection where the entities that are in the subspace realm, hyperspace, that feed on the canceled out charges of failing and dying, and they feed on the death of immortal beings, they can enter the machines and mess with people and create these simulated realities where entering into the machine to pass through this system, they mess with everybody. They basically try and molest everyone over and over again because it's like ravenous, some type of beings that can't stop. And
parasites.
Yeah, and they take on whatever form a person fears.
Yeah.
But that's also why these societies teach people get over fear. We'll take you through all the degrees of fear until you think you've gotten over it. Then we'll backload it with an infinite amount that you never thought you could feel. And the same with knowledge until you hold the maximum potential for knowledge and overcoming fear that a universe can put at you, basically, because it's the construct trying to keep people within it. Because it's literally like a net.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, fear is the greatest way to keep people safe, to keep people in that place where they would rather just stay in that safe net that they know, even though it's this degraded world that we live in, rather than take the chance of not doing that and see what happens. The fear keeps you complacent. It keeps you in the same place.